Welcome to the most powerful story you will ever hear. This is not just a biography. This is not just history. This is a journey into mind that shaped the modern world. And if you're someone learning English, this story is perfect for you because you'll not only improve your listening, thinking, and understanding, but also train your mind to speak clearly, question deeply, and grow wisely, just like Plato did. So sit back, listen closely, and stay until the end. This is the story of Plato, the man who began with questions and ended up changing the world. But before he became a philosopher, before he created the world's first university, before he taught Aristotle, who later taught Alexander the Great, he was just a boy with a powerful mind and an even more powerful dream. Plato was born in Athens, Greece, one of the most advanced cities of the ancient world. Athens was a city of thinkers, poets, warriors, and politicians. A place where art and science lived side by side, but also a place where truth was often sacrificed for power. Plato's family was among the most powerful and respected in Athens. His father claimed descent from kings, while his mother was related to Solon, one of Athens' greatest lawmakers. From birth, Plato was surrounded by politics, privilege, and high expectations. He had access to the best teachers and the finest education in music, poetry, gymnastics, and mathematics. But unlike most students, Plato wasn't satisfied with answers. He wanted to know why the answers were true. Other children memorized lessons. Plato questioned them. When told that justice meant obeying the law, he would ask, "But what if the law is unfair? Is justice still just?" Even as a boy, he was already thinking like a philosopher. At first, Plato dreamed of becoming a poet or playwright. He wrote poems and plays, and even entered competitions. But as he grew, Athens itself began to fall apart. The long war with Sparta left the city broken. Democracy weakened. Leaders grew corrupt, justice disappeared, and truth was twisted by those in power. Plato watched all of this, and something shifted inside him. He realized education was not enough. Power was not enough. What the world truly needed was philosophy. It was at this turning point that Plato met the man who would change his life, Socrates. Socrates was unlike anyone else in Athens. He walked barefoot, cared nothing for wealth or appearance, and never wrote a single word down. Yet he was a giant of the mind. He would stop strangers in the marketplace and ask simple but dangerous questions. What is justice? What is courage? What is truth? And when people answered, he would keep asking, exposing their confusion until they realized they didn't truly know. He wasn't mocking them. He was helping them discover that real wisdom begins with admitting your ignorance. Plato was captivated. He followed Socrates everywhere, listening, questioning, and learning. He gave up poetry, even burning his early works, declaring, "Socrates is the only man who ever made me feel ashamed of my ignorance." From that moment, he stopped chasing fame and power and began chasing truth. But this golden time could not last. Athens, fearful of free minds, eventually turned on Socrates. He was charged with corrupting the youth and disrespecting the city's gods. The real reason was clear. He was too dangerous. He had shaken the foundations of power, and those in control could not stand it. In court, Socrates refused to apologize. He declared, "I would rather die than stop asking questions." He was sentenced to death by poison. Plato witnessed his teacher's final moments, how he drank the cup calmly, how he lost feeling in his body, how he smiled and whispered, "The soul is eternal. Death is not the end." That moment scarred Plato, but it also transformed him. He made a vow. The world may kill Socrates, but his voice would not die. Athens became dangerous for philosophers, so Plato left. He began a long journey of study and exploration across the ancient world, seeking knowledge in Egypt, Italy, and beyond. And with each step, he carried Socrates' voice with him, a mission to keep questioning, keep searching, and keep truth alive. Plato traveled widely, studying geometry, mathematics, and spiritual science from the Egyptian priests. In southern Italy and Sicily, he encountered the Pythagorean school, which taught that the entire universe is built on numbers and harmony. In Cyrene and across the eastern Mediterranean, he explored astronomy, politics, and more. This wasn't tourism. It was mental training. Piece by piece, Plato was building a worldview. He wasn't just collecting facts. He was connecting truths from different cultures. During these years, he also began writing, creating dialogues, philosophical conversations where characters debated questions like, what is justice? What is love? What is a good life? What is the purpose of government? Plato didn't lecture. He made his readers think. Slowly, the boy who once followed Socrates was becoming a master of wisdom in his own right. After more than a decade of study and writing, Plato returned to Athens, but he was no longer the same man. He had seen the world, studied with mystics, mathematicians, and philosophers, and now he was ready to do something no one had done before. Just outside Athens, in a grove of olive trees called Academus, Plato bought land and founded a school, the Academy. It was the first known university in Western history. Its goal was not to teach people what to think, but how to think. There were no grades, no degrees, no textbooks, only debate, dialogue, and discovery. Students studied philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, ethics, politics, logic, and metaphysics. People came from all over Greece to join. The Academy became a beacon of knowledge, staying open for over 9 centuries, long after Plato's death. This was more than a school. It was Plato's revenge against ignorance, his answer to the death of Socrates, and his gift to the world. During these years, Plato wrote some of his most famous works. The Republic, a vision of a just society ruled by philosopher kings. The Symposium, a lively discussion on the nature of love. Phaedrus, about the soul, beauty, and inspiration. The Apology, Socrates' defense speech. Meno, asking whether virtue can be taught. Timaeus, about the origin of the universe, and Gorgias, on rhetoric and the dangers of manipulation. His writings weren't dry lectures. They were alive with characters, stories, and questions that forced readers to think for themselves. He planted seeds of curiosity, logic, and rebellion against blind belief in every mind that encountered his work. Plato's Academy was not like a modern school with classrooms and exams. It was more like a living garden of thought. Students walked under olive trees, sat on benches, or debated in small groups on the grass. There was a small building with scrolls and tables, but most teaching happened outdoors through questions and dialogue. The goal was not to pass exams. It was to train the soul. Plato guided discussions, sometimes speaking, often just asking questions while students debated. The Academy became a community where thinking was a way of life. Students came from across the Greek world, sons of merchants, future politicians, generals, and dreamers. They studied philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, ethics, and politics. For Plato, all knowledge was connected, truth was one, and to see it fully, you had to understand its connections. One day, a young man from northern Greece arrived at the Academy. His name was Aristotle. Sharp, restless, and hungry to learn, he stayed for 20 years. He absorbed everything: ethics, logic, biology, politics, mathematics, and constantly questioned and created new ideas. Plato recognized his brilliance. Aristotle later became tutor to Alexander the Great, whose empire reshaped the known world. In this way, Plato's Academy didn't just shape minds, it shaped history itself. Meanwhile, Plato continued writing. He developed some of his deepest ideas, including the theory of forms. He argued that everything we see, the trees, the chairs, the people, is only a shadow or copy of a perfect form that exists beyond the senses. Just like in his allegory of the cave, most people see only shadows. The philosopher is the one who turns around and sees reality. Plato's theory of forms taught that what we see in the physical world are only shadows of a deeper truth. Beyond appearances lies light, the true reality. This idea shaped not just philosophy, but religion, art, and science for centuries. It taught people to search beyond illusions and look for principles that endure. Plato also explored the nature of the soul, justice, education, and leadership. He believed education was the process of turning the soul, helping people face the light instead of the shadows. By this time, the Academy was famous. Students came not only from across Greece, but from distant lands. Many went on to become teachers, lawmakers, and advisors. Through them, Plato's ideas spread to cities, kingdoms, and eventually entire civilizations. Even though Plato had failed to create a philosopher king in Syracuse, he achieved something far greater. He created generations of philosopher citizens. The academy itself lasted for centuries, surviving wars and shifting rulers. It became a model for future schools, influencing the Romans and later the great universities of Europe. As the years passed, Plato became more than a teacher. He became a legend. Athenians spoke his name with respect, not because of wealth or titles, but because of his mind. His beard had turned white, his steps were slower, his voice gentler. But when he spoke, the entire academy listened. He was no longer only explaining Socrates. He had built his own identity as a philosopher. Age had not weakened him. It made him bolder and deeper. He knew his time was short, but he still had one last mission. Many believe Plato's most important work was The Republic, where he envisioned a just society ruled by philosopher kings. But in his later years, he began writing something even more ambitious: the Laws. Unlike The Republic, which was idealistic, the Laws was practical. It was Plato's blueprint for a real city with real rules: education, government, family, culture, and justice. He wrote about the kind of education children should receive, how families should be structured, how to prevent corruption, how music and art could shape character, and how punishment and rewards could form moral citizens. This was not theory. It was a real design for civilization. While he worked, another philosophical storm was brewing. His brightest student, Aristotle, began questioning Plato's teachings. Aristotle argued that Plato's theory of forms was too mystical, too abstract. Instead of eternal forms beyond the senses, Aristotle focused on what could be observed, measured, and classified: biology, logic, and science. He believed philosophy should work hand in hand with rulers and governments. This created a divide that would shape Western thought for centuries. Plato, the dreamer of eternal truths; Aristotle, the organizer of practical reality. Two visions, different but necessary, born in the same academy. Years later, Aristotle became tutor to a young Macedonian prince named Alexander. That boy would grow into Alexander the Great, the conqueror of empires. Through Aristotle, Plato's influence entered the mind of a king who carried Greek ideas, art, and philosophy across 3 continents. This was Plato's true power. He didn't rule cities or command armies, yet his thoughts traveled further than any soldier could march. Socrates inspired Plato. Plato inspired Aristotle. Aristotle inspired Alexander. And Alexander spread Greek philosophy across the known world. As Plato entered his final years, he reflected more quietly but never stopped teaching. He still walked beneath the olive trees of the academy, smiling when young students asked the same questions he once asked Socrates. He no longer sought to prove anything. He simply guided like a lighthouse on the shore. Visitors came from afar to hear his words, to see him, to touch his hand. To them, Plato was not just a man. He was the embodiment of wisdom. His body aged, but his mind remained sharp. He kept working on the laws until the very end. Some say he was still writing on his deathbed, surrounded by scrolls and candlelight. Plato passed away quietly in Athens, the city of his birth. No royal funeral, no ceremony, just silence. But Plato was not truly gone, because Plato was not just a body. He was an idea that truth matters, even at the cost of life. That deep thinking is more powerful than loud speaking. That education is the highest form of justice. That a mind trained to think is more dangerous than any army. After his death, his nephew Speusippus took over the academy, keeping alive the sacred space where truth mattered more than power. Generations of students continued to pass through its gates, and Plato's ideas survived the rise and fall of governments. But his words were about to begin a second, secret life. As the Roman Empire rose, it absorbed much of Greek culture, art, literature, philosophy. But Romans were practical people, builders of roads, aqueducts, and armies. Plato's work seemed too abstract, too Greek. Only a few, like Cicero, began to read, translate, and respect his writings. Then came a greater challenge. As Christianity grew and eventually became the dominant force in the Roman world, Plato's ideas had to survive in secret. Many Christian leaders saw Greek philosophy as dangerous, something that questioned faith, God, and obedience. Books were burned. Schools were closed. Eventually, Emperor Justinian shut down Plato's academy after nearly 900 years of continuous teaching. It was a tragedy, The last students were forced to leave. Some fled east to Persia. Others disappeared. Many lost their homes. It looked as though Plato had finally been silenced. But truth cannot be killed so easily. Even though the academy was destroyed, many of Plato's dialogues had already been copied by hand. Delicate scrolls, written in ink on parchment and papyrus, were carried by monks, hidden in monasteries, preserved in secret libraries, or even buried underground. Some copies made their way to Byzantium, modern-day Istanbul. Others traveled to the Islamic world, where scholars translated them into Arabic. During the Islamic Golden Age, philosophers studied Plato deeply. In centers of learning like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba, great thinkers such as Al-Farabi, Avicenna, and Averroes explored Plato's ideas alongside Aristotle's. While Europe remained in the Dark Ages, Plato's spirit survived to the pens of Arabic scholars far from Athens. Centuries later, Europe began to awaken. Artists, scientists, and writers searched for inspiration in ancient texts. This was the age of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Galileo. And in this new dawn, they rediscovered Plato. Thanks to Arabic translations and a few surviving Greek copies, his dialogues returned to Europe, now printed and spread by the invention of the printing press. One man, Marsilio Ficino, a Catholic priest and philosopher in Italy, translated Plato's works into Latin and reopened the Platonic Academy in Florence. Inspired by the original, Plato was reborn, but now he was not just a philosopher. He was a beacon of light in a world that had forgotten how to think. Plato's return during the Renaissance lit a fire across Europe. Artists studied beauty and form through his ideas. Scientists used his belief in abstract truth to guide experiments. Political thinkers read the Republic and dreamed of better societies. His vision of truth beyond appearances helped people question kings, priests, and long-standing traditions. Even though he had lived more than 18 centuries earlier, Plato became a revolutionary voice. He became the silent partner of Copernicus, Descartes, Newton, and later Einstein, because they too believed what Plato believed, that reality is deeper than appearances, and that truth is worth seeking. In the Enlightenment, philosophers such as Kant, Hegel, and Rousseau read Plato and used his ideas to reshape politics, freedom, morality, and justice. Even Karl Marx studied the Republic while imagining a new kind of society. And in the modern world, professors, psychologists, teachers, and spiritual thinkers still return to Plato's writings to confront life's hardest questions. Why? Because Plato was never about giving answers. He was about asking questions. And the world never runs out of questions. Today, more than 24 of Plato's dialogues survive intact. Famous ones include the Republic, the Apology, the Symposium, Phaedrus, Meno, Phaedo, Timaeus, and the Laws, his final and longest work. These are studied in universities across the world, translated into dozens of languages, and shared freely online. They remain part of humanity's greatest library. So, who was Plato, really? He never ruled an empire. He never commanded an army. He never sought fame as a poet or power as a politician. He did not believe in speaking to win. He believed in speaking to awaken. He was not a prophet, not a warrior, not a king. He was something rarer. A man who chose truth over everything. From the moment he met Socrates, he gave up comfort for questions. He gave up applause for silence. He gave up luxury for logic. He gave up being somebody to understand everything. He was a mind on fire, and that fire still burns. In his final years, Plato turned his attention to the soul. He believed the soul was eternal, that death was not the end, and that our bodies were temporary vessels for something greater. True knowledge, he argued, was not learned but remembered, because the soul already carried it within. This was revolutionary. While many saw death as a final end, Plato saw it as a return, a coming home. In Phaedo, he described Socrates' last moments, where the soul is likened to a bird in a cage. Death is not a loss, but freedom. In the Symposium, he spoke of love as more than attraction. It was a ladder of ascent. First came physical attraction, then love of the mind, then love of beauty itself, and finally love of truth. For Plato, real love was a desire to unite with eternal truth. Love was the engine of growth, and the soul was the traveler. Plato is everywhere. When you ask, what is real? You're thinking like Plato. When you say, I want to understand myself. You are walking his path. When a teacher challenges a student with a question instead of an answer, that is the Socratic method, preserved by Plato. He lives in our schools, our science, our psychology, our ethics, our spirituality, and even in our films. Movies like The Matrix, Inception, and Interstellar all echo Plato's voice. What is real? What is illusion? What is the soul? Plato never told us what to think. He taught us how to think. And that gift is still growing across every culture, every age, and every mind willing to ask the questions that never die. As a learner, Plato offers 7 eternal lessons. First, learn to be a follower before you try to be a master. Plato didn't become a great philosopher overnight. He began as a silent listener, sitting at Socrates' feet. He watched, listened, and absorbed for years without interrupting or pretending to be wise. Only after he had mastered humility as a student did he create the Academy, write the Republic, and become one of history's greatest minds. The lesson: don't rush to lead. Learn, observe, absorb. When the time is right, your wisdom will speak for itself. Second, be content with the title, but obsessed with the work. Plato was never obsessed with fame or recognition. He never tried to be a celebrity. He didn't even call himself a philosopher. Others gave him that title because of his work. He taught every day. He wrote, he questioned, but he never chased applause. The lesson: be content with being called a student, a teacher, a writer, a creator. What matters most is not what people call you, but what you do. Third, take charge of your own happiness. Plato believed the soul must be trained, and that true happiness doesn't come from outside things, but from inner balance. He said that the person who makes happiness depend on themselves has chosen the best plan for life. Today, many blame money, jobs, or society for unhappiness. Plato's message is simple: stop blaming. Your happiness is your responsibility. Fourth, work hard to accomplish great things. Plato spent decades writing, teaching, questioning, and building the Academy. He believed the soul grows only through discipline and effort. He said that excellence is not a gift, but a skill that comes from practice. We don't act rightly because we are excellent. We become excellent by acting rightly. The lesson: don't wait to feel ready. Start practicing. Start doing. Hard work isn't optional. It's the path. Fifth, contribute to society as much as you can. Plato believed we are all part of something larger: a city, a community, a society. A just man is not just good for himself. He must be good for others. In the Republic, every person has a role. No role is greater or lesser, but each must be done with excellence. The lesson: don't just live. Contribute. Your skills, your values, your voice, they matter. 6. Get involved in politics or risk being ruled by the wrong people. Plato warned that the price good men pay for not engaging in politics is to be governed by worse men. He didn't mean everyone should be a politician, but he urged us not to be passive. Learn what's happening. Speak with reason. Vote with care. Be aware. If good people withdraw, bad people will take their place. 7. Democracy can be dangerous if minds are not trained. Plato witnessed Socrates' death, decided by a democratic vote. Ordinary citizens, driven by fear and emotion, ended the life of Athens' wisest man. That is why Plato warned that democracy without education leads to chaos. He believed in wisdom-led leadership, not popularity contests. He wanted a world where rulers were guided by truth, not by the loudest voices. The lesson: freedom is powerful, but without knowledge, it can destroy itself. That is why Plato founded the Academy, to train minds before giving them power. If these lessons made you think deeply, opened your heart, or helped you see life differently, if it improved your English, your perspective, or even your sense of calm, then this is your place. Subscribe now, because this channel is not only about language. It is about truth. It is about meaning. It is about becoming something more. And just as Plato taught, don't follow the noise. Follow the light. Stay curious. Stay strong. And always remember, your soul is powerful. See you in the next video.